the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Hi, it's Rich Hoffman here. I'm not done talking about this NAGPRA issue, the 1990 Act, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. I think it's a devastating law that was put into effect in 1990, and I call it the Dance of the Wolves Act, even though there was a couple Democrats that put it forth in July of 1990. There was a special screening of Dance of the Wolves in Washington, D.C. I think it was in October, while this bill was floating around for consideration before the vote. So anybody that was on the fence on it was able to watch that movie, and the buzz around Washington was this is kind of the trend of the future, and we need to respect indigenous people. Because look what we did to them. We came and built this evil America on top of their very friendly habitat, and we took all their land from them, and that was a crime, and now we have to give back to it. And you see that this is a policy that Democrats have always enacted as a way to undermine American sovereignty, and I would call it seditious at best. And when you use people that are considered to be victims of that aggression, Democrats have clearly done that, to make their point to undismantle America and give back essentially the land to the indigenous people that had it stolen from them. And that was the heart behind NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And what it was designed to do in 1990, the point of the bill was to, again, a couple Democrats put this forward. This is not a Republican thing. This is very much a Democrat thing, and everyone at the time, George Bush ended up signing it, but he's not been exactly. He was a globalist. He was not a continuation of the Reagan administration. I remember at the time. I was very much aware of what was going on while that was happening. I was not a George Bush fan. I voted against him. I worked against him in the 1992 election, largely because of things like this. And I went for Ross Perot in the Reform Party, and I stepped away from. If that was the kind of Republican Party that we had, I was going to work against it, because he was what we call a rhino at best, and he was definitely looking to continue the policies of Democrats to undermine America from its foundation. And the Indians were what they call the Native Americans. They're not so native. There's a lot of Native Americans before the Native Americans, and where do you draw the line of what a Native American is? And this came up to my mind because of this very fantastic book I've been talking about, Windover. I consider this a critical element to the field of archaeology, and probably the best, most important archaeological discovery in the world ever, and I'm saying a lot, but it's in Central Florida, outside Titusville, outside Kennedy Space Center, and essentially found a cemetery of people who had and I've talked a lot about this, and I'll get into it more. I'm going to continue to talk a lot about it because it's significant. And I under my wife's suggestion, I guess I've known about it for a while, but I hadn't actually seen the site or saw the exhibit at the Brevard Natural History Museum. And it's interesting because since NAGPRA came along, all the museums have had to kind of get rid of their displays. 4 things that NAGPRA did was to stop the ongoing desecration, as defined by these Democrats, of historical era native graves. And you couldn't put those bones found on display. I used to remember going to Serpent Mound, and they had they had displays of skulls out that were found in the mounds. And this certainly is why the speculation of giants that were found in the mounds all over the Ohio Valley and down the Mississippi, everywhere actually. There's large people at Wendover. This is why the debate about large skulls or large skeletons is flourishing since this bill has been put in place, because people smell something scandalous in the water. And when you see that there's some policy that comes along that erodes away trust, people fill it with their imaginations. And more often than not, those imaginations are not very far off the mark. So it also, this NAGPRA addressed museums hoarding from 19th and 20th century skeletal specimens. They had to give those skeletons back to the indigenous people, as the indigenous people were defined. So all these bones that may not have been completely attributed to some tribe were given back to tribes to manage as if they had authority over the sciences of American sovereignty. Really a lot of bad things going on with NAGPRA. It really needs to be repealed. Then also part of that was to restore the dignity and agency of living communities, which is Indian tribes and all that kind of thing. Again, to give back the land or the artifacts that were stolen from these people, as defined by Democrats, the same people who are behind open border policies now, or they're anti-Trumpers now, and they're definitely been against the Tea Party all this time. These are the kinds of people that defined the policy in 1990, and that since we've seen, I think the Republicans were willing to go see Dance with Wolves at that big Washington premiere, talk about it over coffee. Yeah, we probably should have treated the Indians a little better, and let's give them back something. Let's pass NAGPRA. And then one of the last things about it was that it was to force everyone to operate within federal recognition frameworks. So anything that had federal property attached to it had to follow within this framework, which is just about everything, because the plot of the federal government was to basically become the dominant landowner for everybody, and take away private ownership. That was the socialist Marxist trajectory at the time, and it turned out to be a real mess.
God, hear our call. We dance in your light. Great Spirit of the sky, guide our path. Rest, let, guard of fire.
So there's a lot of policies that I've observed since NAGPRA was put into effect, and even if you thought there were good intentions behind it, it's turned out to be a devastating mess to archaeological research, which you want to have. And I would say America should be leading that effort. We have a lot of universities, a lot of smart people. We have a free press and all kinds of means to make discovery interesting. But this whole NAGPRA thing has really harmed research. It's hurt perpetuation of scientific knowledge in displays in museums, and it's been really a horrible thing. And it's come to my mind because it was my wife's suggestion for us to go check this out, because it was important to a project I was working on, and I might have heard about it and thought about it, but didn't really put too much credence behind it until we actually had a chance to go visit that museum. Then I picked up a few books, not many books on it, and then I wanted to know more. I wanted to read all the details, so I got this book, which chronicles the dig itself over a 3-year period to all the scientific details. And it's just it's a publication of the University of Florida. Florida State University. And after reading it, I was astonished at how little the most important archaeological site in the world has gained traction in the United States, and largely because of NAGPRA. So I'm fans of these guys in England, the Time team. If you've ever been to England, you know on Channel 4 they play this all the time. You can see these guys on YouTube actually, but they do hundreds of episodes of visiting archaeological sites and doing just like Chef Ramsay does for the Hell's Kitchen. They have a show on archaeology where they go in and they do a dig and they discover what they can and they publish their finds. And when I was over there at one of the English heritage sites, English heritage is fantastic. They preserve their history really well, but they turn all their discoveries into really marketable material, and they have a lot of fun with it. And these guys, these archaeologists, are celebrities in English culture, which is the way I think it should be. And I think there's archaeologists here, like this Glenn Doran, should have been an absolute rock star in American culture for the discoveries at Wendover. But instead, after 3 years, they saw that the NAGPRA was coming along, and then they reburied it so they wouldn't have the controversies, couldn't get any funding to do any more research, and they buried the site with it halfway uncovered. There's half of the cemetery, it was left untouched, and they know it's there. They just didn't do any more digging because their time ran out. The political winds were coming to erode them, and it's a shame because it's a significant site. And they make a big deal in books like this one from the Time team, and they make a big deal out of finding a piece of pottery in a city like Bath. They've done a remarkable job with what little they have to work with. And there's a lot more going on in the United States than you find in England, but they've turned, there's a lot of stuff in England that really they've turned into entire books and TV shows of information. It's very entertaining and on a very respectful scholarship level. A couple other I like this publication I've talked about, Biblical Archaeology Review. I read it voraciously. I love all the people that are part of the Biblical Archaeology Society. But if you know anything about it, it's always hostile to get dig permits and to get dig seasons that go very long because the region is so volatile. And then another guy I like a lot is Joel Kramer. He does shows on YouTube. This is his book, Where God Came Down. It's top archaeological sites, ones he covers on his show. YouTube show, and it has absolutely great coverage. But if you follow him, and he's doing a good job of going around and really kind of digging, literally, into the challenges archaeology has all over the world, but they shouldn't have. And he's constantly running into border problems and checkpoints, all these different factions of people from different military regimes are controlling the region, and you really can't do a lot of great research because you don't have free access to it. So what's the shame in all this? I mean, England's essentially a Marxist country, and they have probably, I think, one of the best archaeology programs on planet Earth. We should be doing the same kind of thing. When you go to Japan, you have the tombs, the key tombs there in Osaka and around that area. They have some very ancient sites. They have great archaeology off the coast that's underwater, but not a whole lot's going on in those places because they don't have a commitment to it. And there's a lot in China that's not being done. You really need the kind of approach that the Time team guys have in England, and I think they're the model for what everybody should be doing in the world. In Biblical Archaeology Review, they try their best to cover sites in the Holy Land. That's great, wonderful, but contentious. And again, you have adventurers who go out there and really try to pluck away at the facade, and they get resistance everywhere. So your rate of discovery is really low. And then you get one of the most perfect situations in the world. Wendover, it's a free country. You have a lot of access to capital. We have a wonderful marketplace to display this. So we could do a lot better than the Time Team group in England. And Glenn Dorn should have been on TV every day. Should have been all over the Discovery Channel. We're the freest place on earth, and yet we're giving the bones back to people that didn't. These bones weren't even affiliated with those tribes. The Seminoles or the Lakota or the Sioux or the Cherokee. The DNA, because these skeletons had brain tissue still in the skulls. Don't trace to any known Native American family out that exists because they're 8,000 years old. They predate all the assumptions. So they're the real Native Americans, but the problem is they likely inherited the territory from previous cultures. So there's Native Americans on top of Native Americans on top of Native Americans. So how do you draw the line? And how could you ever come up with this ridiculous law from NAGPRA to basically say we're not going to research any of our ancient history? We're going to essentially have the same policy China has, which is we don't want any evidence of any previous culture that came before us. So we're going to use the disguise of some argument of indigenous people and attribute the fact that we stole their land as a reason to give back the bones. They prove that there was more advanced cultures before we ever came along. And we're going to erase the whole thing and use a law like this and the guilt of the time to try and eradicate the evidence. And then say there's no evidence that there were giants, or there's no evidence that there was anybody had anything complicated. Everybody was a hunter and gatherer, and that's where Democrats want to go anyway, so it fulfills the Democrat policy. They sort of don't want to talk about sophisticated civilizations that predate them. So the NAGPRA people were wrong to set the parameters as they did. They've hurt research. I can tell you it's disgusting. They don't have the kind of repatriation acts in England that they have here in the United States, which you would think they would because they have very top-heavy. They've been really bad on COVID policies in England. But these guys go around, they find bones, they do research, they find people from all the different layers of the time periods that we consider: the Roman occupation, the AD period, the Iron Age, Neolithic Age, Bronze Age, Mesolithic, Paleolithic. How do you know how to look at your history if you can't date the bones and figure out what the people were doing at the time and study what they were eating, what kind of lifestyles they lived? England has all these different periods: the late medieval, post-medieval, early modern, and bones and the people that are buried in these places are your access to that information. So why would you want to know? And that's the tragedy, and that's what comes to my mind. I've been very hostile towards NAGPRA, not out of disrespect to people's dead, but because it's concealing history in ways that are detrimental. And when they tell you there's no evidence of this stuff, it's because a law came along and erased the evidence and gave it back to people, indigenous tribes, like they call indigenous, by giving them unearned merit because they were not the natives. The natives are the Wendover people, and likely many thousands of other groups of people that were in the United States that are yet to be uncovered, or because of hostile laws like NAGPRA, developers aren't letting anybody know when they do find bones, and the sites are destroyed forever, and we're not going to learn anything at all by those sites. So this book really kind of brought it to my attention because it's a time capsule that right before this law was put into place, this book was written. This ancient site was discovered. Glenn Dorn did a great job. He had some accolades, but it rose and fell in 3 dig seasons and then was covered and buried, and you put a plaque on it. And then all these, what they did find was put on file at display at Florida State University. And now NAGPRA, you're supposed to give back those bones to the indigenous tribes, but how do you give the bones back to a tribe that was 8,000 years old? Because none of the tribes that were affiliated with NAGPRA are that old. This was a discovery that changed the timeline dramatically, and it's important to understand. And what we've seen is a through NAGPRA, we've seen a desire to erase that from human consciousness. And I would suggest that our policy should be more like the Time Team guys in England, who I think are doing the best archaeological research in the world under the best conditions, and they put it on Channel 4, and people love it. It's a great show. It's a popular show. That's how it should be everywhere, especially in the United States. And it's a shame that this Windover book, when I say it's probably one of the finest books ever published, it's because the conditions that it was published under happened before this NAGPRA issue, the research and development came about before NAGPRA went into effect. The book was published after, and it was a result of this is the last time you're going to see something this spectacular, because the dig that made all that information possible, the information that made all this possible has now been made illegal. They couldn't study the bones. Now they'd have to give them back to somebody, but who do you give them to? Because they're 8,000 years old. And because you can't answer that question, they're not digging, they're not asking a question, because then you have all kinds of problems. You open up a whole can of worms, because who do you go to say, who do I give these bones to? What Indian tribe do I give them to? Because the timeline was wrong. The Democrats knew what they were doing when they created it. It was a prequel to the kind of policies that were meant to undermine the United States. Any history, any validation to Western expansion that we would have had, it was meant to invalidate them. And that was the point of the Democrats using the Indians to cause seditious behavior and then trying to label in a public forum, because Dance with Wolves came out and was playing on the theaters, and Republicans were like, well, I can get behind that. That sounds like a good idea. I think I'll support the Indians, and we'll treat them with some respect. And they got suckered into doing a seditious activity to undermine the true history of North America. And now we can't do any kind of research because of this crazy law that was created by Democrats, which isn't just as stupid as telling people to get mandatory vaccines, or have open border policies, anchor baby discussions. All these things were meant to undermine American authority and the validation of America as a continent. Because NAGPRA was meant to not just erase the past, but invalidate the American settlement of on top of what they designated indigenous people to be. And then any discovery we made, we had to give them back their bones out of respect, as a psychological mechanism to undermine the settlement of North America by European descendants seeking freedom. And that's what the Democrats who come up with this NAGPRA law in 1990 and suckered George Bush and a bunch of Republicans to sign it, that's what they were up to. And we see it even today. We see the same games going on with energy policy. Get rid of nuclear power, get rid of coal, get rid of natural gas, and go to solar and wind. It's the same argument that they did with these indigenous peoples in NAGPRA, and in order to erase history and create a globalist society that was ran by a centralized government, much like you see in China. That's what we're dealing with. That's how bad it is. And that's why I think that a book like this one just really kind of lays a foundation of why NAGPRA shouldn't exist at all. We should be doing a lot more investigations like this one, and it should be on the level of the Time Team guys in England, and they should not be beating us in archaeological research. In the politics that align with it, we should have the freest marketplace to show the best going forward, have the best archaeology programs to study history and wherever the evidence takes us, boldly and with a lot of fanfare, like they show in the Time Team episodes. That should be going on right now. It should have definitely been going on at this Windover site, even to this very moment. And it should be a tourist attraction to go there and see it the way you go see Stonehenge and Flag Fin in England. That's the way this Windover site should be in North America. It should be as popular as Disney World. And the money earned should go into future archaeological funding, so you don't have to try to eliminate stand on the side of a road in order to raise money for your dig. There's a lot of things that need to change, and I think it starts with dealing with NAGPRA and getting back to the kind of archaeology that made the Windover site so successful, reported in that fine book, and the hints that we need to do a whole lot more of that. A whole lot more. Need to take some advice from our friends at the Time Team. Wonderful people. Need a whole lot more people like that in the world. We'll learn a whole lot more than we've ever learned so far in what's chronicled. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.
Thank you for listening.